Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 147 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We'll take a look at some of the wonderful mods people be making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got a very interesting assortment of animals. We've got a few extinct ones, a few island ones, and other very cool animals. So we're going to get stuck into today. So our first mod is actually the Panamanian Golden Frog, which was done by. Have a look at one of these little guys. See if we can find one in a good light. There we are, perfect. So this was done by Junora Pizza, Scott, and Hexabit. So it's the Panamanian Golden Frog, also known as the Serracantha stubfoot frog. They're a species of toad, believe it or not, endemic to Panama, as you can guess, and they live across the mountainous streams of the Coloderan cloud forests in west central Panama, and is sadly a species that's considered critically endangered, but we'll get into that. So very interestingly, despite its common name, it's not actually a frog, it's a true toad, so it's in the family Bufonidae with true frogs, and was first described as a subspecies Azipterus avernus, but then it was described as its own species. So it's actually considered a national symbol of Panama and is one of the most beautiful frogs that you can find there. Its skin color you can see varies from like bright yellow green to bright gold, with some having black spots along their legs and things like that, which is quite interesting. Females are typically a little bit larger than the males, with females typically ranging between 45 to 63 millimeters, or about 1.8 to 2.5 inches in length, and about 4 to 15 grams in weight, while males are slightly smaller, at about 35 to 48 millimeters, or about 1.4 to 1.49 inches, and then 3 to 12 grams, or about 0.11 to 0.42 ounces, which is interesting. Very interesting as well is these guys have toxins. So they have a variety of toxins like tetrodotoxin, bufalocaloids, and things like that that are very potent and also water soluble. So they attack the nerve centers that anyone who comes in contact with and uses them about predators. And due to the risk of testing the poison on humans, it's typically done with mice, with mice typically being fatal with large doses between 20 to 30 minutes. And death is preceded by convulsions, which functions until the functions of the heart and lungs just don't work. So they're pretty noxious little guys. So in terms of the golden frog, they're endemic to Panama, as we mentioned, so they can only be found there and live in the mountain streams on the eastern side of the Tuscarora mountain range around the Coola and the Panama provinces. Their geographic range extends to the far east and then down into things like that before the onset of the chytrid fungus, which is really sad, which caused the population to collapse. But also vital habitat has been lost by habitat destruction, small farms, livestock range, real estate development, things like that. But luckily there are many zoos around North America and Panama, about 50 institutions that have a captive breeding program, which we'll get into. So in terms of their lifespan, the Panamanian golden frog lives for about 12 years, and it's actually unusual is that it communicates through a form of spitophore, which are waving at rivals of males and things like that as well. And in addition, they actually make very unusual sounds, and it's believed this adaptation evolved in the frogs because they had to get the noise and because of the noise of the fast-flowing streams and the habitats they live in, which is interesting as well. So males will tend to stay near the streams where breeding occurs, but in non-breeding, the females retreat into the forest. The males use a soft call to kind of entice her in, then they grab the female and hang on when she crosses a path, and if she's respective or receptive, she'll tolerate it, and then if not, she'll try to buck them off, and then they typically have access or mate. It lasts for a few days to a few months, and then they'll usually lay their eggs in a shallow stream. Very interesting as well, the development can be split into 4 stages. So these guys have a larva or tadpole stage, juvenile, subadult, adult. So during the larval stage, they typically emerge from the eggs about 2 to 10 days of development. And they're entirely aquatic in this stage. It can be found in waters between 20 to 21 degrees and at depths between 5 to 35 centimeters. And after emerging, they mostly spend their time in shallow pools and try to find their own place like that. Very round snouts, very typical tadpole looks, and then they also will develop this kind of dark brown and then become gold as they get a little bit older. And the juveniles, they'll feed on algae, and then the juveniles will come up. So they are typically amphibious, but far smaller ranges, and the juveniles cannot be found more than 2 meters from the stream, and then the recently modified juveniles will actually be found with the tadpoles. And like their adult counterparts, they typically go to higher elevations or recede into trees to hide from predators, but due to their small size, they're not able to cover as much ground or climb as high, so they typically hide. And at the onsets of heavy rains, they'll flee onto open stream sides, which is normally when the adult males are known to roam, so they typically run away. And then territorial behaviors of adult males can be initiated by these rains. And then visually, the juveniles have a snout development between 8.4 to 17.1 millimeters and get like a vivid green color, which is quite interesting. So it's cool that we know a lot about these guys. And then the subadults of the species have full ranges, but then sometimes found near adult males, which is noteworthy because the males are fairly solitary and combative with the presence, so they typically hide out and try to, snap it a little bit. And then they become adults, of course, when they lighten up as well. So in terms of their social life, they tend to socialize with other amphibians using sounds from the throats and also hand waving. And they're typically an airless species, so they don't have the big air hole that a lot of species have. But they communicate with a lot of vocalizations, but also like lower frequencies and things like that, and also use signals as hand signals as well. They're also very territorial and will maintain a territory throughout most of their life. And the result of this flight facility, they do not hesitate to vocalize when they meet another frog. So they're typically about, oh, fight me about it. And then they recognize sounds, they can find the origin of them. But when they encounter a predator, they'll often wave or lift their foot at the predator to bring attention to their colors. And these colors, hey, I'm bright, I'm toxic, don't eat me. And some animals will eat them, and especially the colubrid snakes have been known to eat them and be able to metabolize their poison. So it's not foolproof, but they have other ways to kind of also predators, like they'll prevent predation is different from their diurnal habits and nocturnal habits. So they typically, adult males are active on the ground during the day. They'll return to the tree at night to kind of escape predators, or even sometimes bury in the ground and things like that. So we'll talk about the wonderful conservation story of these guys. Really, really nice little cuties. So the Panamanian golden frog sadly started disappearing in the 1990s from the forest where they live in, and we're like, what the heck's going on? And then they were actually filmed in the series Life of Cold Blood by David Attenborough. And then the remaining few specimens that were found were taken into captivity to protect them from poachers. So the main reason why their populations have declined so drastically is because of chytrid fungus, which affects a lot of species of frogs around the world, but particularly in the Americas is a big issue because it's been introduced there. But luckily there have been a lot of people trying to help them. So the San Diego Zoo kind of started the conservation effort for these guys in 2003 and has successfully bred 500 individuals, but will not be released to the wild until their fungal disease is less than a threat. But they also help with conservation efforts as well. So the temperatures they are kept at may be correlated to chytrid fungus, but of cold periods, so they try to keep them kind of safe from that. And not only do these frogs are threatened, they're also threatened by human development, so people making things like that. Pet trade as well, people collect them because they're rare, so it's big threats for these little guys. And luckily there are projects of Salmon, such as Project Golden Frog, which is a big scientific, educational, zoological institutions around Panama and the United States doing all sorts of projects, funding study, captive breeding, all that stuff, funding education, which is pretty interesting, with efforts like in 2005, the Houston Zoo creating the El Vante Amphibian Conservation Center in Panama to help with frogs as well, and then some other things have been helped as well. And other things as well. Prior to the spread of this fungus, they were actually kept in captivity quite a bit for assurance colonies, and the skin of amphibians can be home to a diverse of different communities, so they did a lot of research trying to find out their captivity, things like that, species richness, things like that, and try to find the reintroduction efforts as well. So the reason why these won't likely be introduced to the wild in the short term is potentially because of just them being killed by, chytrid fungus again. But luckily we do have the insurance population, so hopefully once chytrid fungus is sorted out, we've managed to figure it out, these guys will be back in the wild, and hopefully they'll be back to normal, which is quite cool. So Sad little story for these guys, but it's definitely not the end of the world. But a great example of how zoos help animals, which is really, really cool, especially animals like the Panamanian golden frog. Really, really cool. So that's the Panamanian golden frog done. Next up, we're going to have a look at this one. So Viral Cyclops, famous Zoo Tycoon, not Zoo Tycoon, Jurassic World Evolution 2 modder, who's made a couple other guys. So we are going to have a look at the Galapagos pink lang iguana. So look at this wonderful guy. Friend. So we're going to talk about these guys. So the Galapagos land iguana, or Conocephalus subcruentatus, these guys are a large species of iguana found only in the Galapagos. So they're endemic to the Galapagos Islands, in the dry lowlands islands such as Fernandina, Santa Cruz, Bella, South Plaza, so most of them. So there's a little bit of a variety between them. There's varying morphology. So there are two species of in this genus. So this Galapagos pink iguana from northern Isabel Island, and then Santa Fe Island. There's a couple different subspecies. So these guys actually split from marine iguanas about 8 to 10 million years ago, and then there's been some splits about 5.7 million years ago. So it seems these guys actually kind of split apart. And there's a few different subspecies because obviously there's different islands where they become isolated. But yeah, really, really cool animals. So Charles Darwin actually described these guys as ugly animals with a yellowish orange beneath and a brownish red color on top, which is with a low facial angle and their singularly stupidly appearance, which is quite funny. But they're actually still quite big. They're actually one of the largest lizards in the world. So they get to a length about 0.9 to 1.5 meters, or about 3 to 5 feet, and weigh up to 13 kilograms, depending upon the island they're from. But being cold-blooded, they need to control their body temperature by basking and finding different microclimates and things like that to hide in. They also have a symbiotic relationship with the birds, very similar to the other species. What's the other name of the other species? I kind of forgot it. It is the Barrington Island land iguana. So they're very similar. There was often considered a subspecies of this guy, but now they're considered two different species. But yeah, it's still really, really cool. In terms of their diet and longevity, these guys are herbivores, very much like other iguanas. But however, they will take carrion or insects or centipedes when they get the chance. Because there's not much fresh water pool on the islands they actually get the majority of their moisture from the prickly pear cactus. And they eat most of that. And they've been known to live quite long, so the estimated lifespan for these guys is about 60 to 69 years. So in terms of reproduction, Galapagos land iguanas get sexually mature between 8 to 15 years old, depending on the island they're from, and mating seems to vary between the islands, but as soon after mating, the female migrates to sandy areas to nest, and will lay between 2 to 20 eggs in a burrow about 50 centimeters deep, and then these eggs will hatch about 90 to 125 days later. And on South Plaza Island, actually, which is very interesting, the territories of marine and land iguanas do mix, and then they will sometimes interbreed. And most of these unions are from male marine iguanas and female land iguanas, and they're still able to create babies together, but the babies are sterile. So that shows how, nature's not always so clean cut. It's very interesting. So the population estimates are between 5 to 10,000 in the Galapagos, and they're abundant on Centaur Island as well. But very interestingly, we don't know how they got to potentially South America, but we think they got there from South America. They would have potentially rafted. So the marine and land iguana would have diverged about 8 million years ago, which is older than actually any of the extant Galapagos Islands. So the islands were even a thing by the time the marine and land iguana split. So it's believed they inhabited a lot of parts of the archipelago that are now submerged, and then they've basically kind of split apart as the islands kind of changed the tectonic plate. They just moved between the islands, as it happens, so they've been split apart, which is quite interesting. But yeah, they've also been part of recovery efforts. So there's in the early 1990s, there's been efforts to introduce them to Barrentina Island, and these animals became extinct on these islands in 1954 after being wiped out by soldiers stationed there. However, there's been lots of populations that have been helping them in captive breeding programs. Actually, the Charles Journal Research Station captive breeding program has reintroduced them to a lot of areas. So there's a lot of good conservation work with these guys, even though they are considered vulnerable. They're doing definitely a lot better. because of human help, which is really, really cool. So yeah, really, really cool guy. Definitely love these pink iguanas. Viral Cyclops always does a really great job, I think. I do always enjoy Viral Cyclops stuff. Look at this beautiful iguana. I love these guys. So, next up... Ooh. Oh, that was an accident. Anyway, let's have a look at our next animal. So this is done by Great Cake Mods. We've got a lot of Great Cake Mods done today. So we're going to have a look at the striped caracara, a striated caracara. So this was known as the Foster's caracara. So these guys are a species of falcon, which includes the falcon and the caracaras. They are found in Argentina, Chile, and the Falkland Islands. And in the Falkland Islands, it's known as the Johnny Rook, after the Johnny penguin, which is the Gentoo penguin. So they were first described in 1788 by German naturalist Johann Friedrich Gall, which is quite interesting, and was placed in the genus Falco, but it's actually a different thing now. So the taxonomy is not really settled on these guys, but they place these guys and other caracaras in these straight places them in like 4 other caracaras, but the caracara is kind of a different group. But they all agree that the striated caracara is a monotypic, so there's not many different subspecies, but there's a little bit of taxonomy where they fit, on the family tree, which is quite interesting. So in terms of size and everything like that, they get to about 53 to 65 centimeters, or about 21 to 26 centimeters long, inches long, with a wingspan between 116 to 125 centimeters, or about 46 to 49 inches, and then weigh between about 1.2 kilograms, or about 2.6 pounds. With the sexes pretty much being the same, adults are mostly black and brownish with white tawny streaks on the upper back and neck and breast, as you can see. Typically mostly black, but some white tips on the coverts and everything as well. But we can see we'll have a look at the juveniles. We've got a little picture of the juveniles over here. Is that a juvenile or an adult? No, that's an adult. I'll have a look at the juvenile. So you can see juveniles are typically, a little bit more brownish, yellowish orange. Their bare skin is actually salmon pink as well. Chestnut colours, and they attain their adult colours after about 5 years. And the most common call is the cat-like wailing, which is like awau, which is high-pitched scream, where they kind of get their name caracara. So as I mentioned as well, we'll have a look at other animals. We'll have a look at the adults. Look at you guys. Oh no, that's not what we wanted to look at. So the caracara, in terms of where it's found, as I mentioned, it's found on the outer Falkland Islands and the far south of Argentina and Chile. It was hunted to extinction in the East Falklands, but where they live on rocky cliffs and tussock grasses and generally long migratory, and they tend to may move seasonally up to higher elevations, and are only a winter visitor in some other South American islands. In terms of its feeding, these guys are opportunistic, so they pretty much, on that seafood diet, they'll seafood, they eat it. They eat on carrion, seabirds, marine mammals, vertebrates, stolen eggs, livestock, and food scraps. They've even been recorded eating penguins, pups of animals such as South American fur seals and southern elephant seals, various shellfish, pretty much everything that. When they do attack large animals, they will bob them in groups, but on vertebrates, they'll also eat like kelp fly larvae, everything like that. They've even been seen hunting young lambs, which leads to prosecution from sheep farmers until there was a law in 1999 forbidding killing the species. They're also parasitic, so they'll often rob and displace other species, such as kelp geese, which is quite interesting. Let's keep going on. In terms of breeding, we'll have a look at the little babies. Look at this little guy. So on the Falkland Islands, they typically breed from late October to January, and the nests are built of twigs and grasses on the ground, under tussock grass clumps or on cliff ledges. And they usually use these nests on loose colonies, with nests sometimes as little as 7 meters apart. And there's some evidence actually of cooperative breeding, which is really cool. Their clutch size is typically between two eggs, but they can be up to 4. And the incubation time, fledging, and things like that is not actually known, so they're not too well known. But in terms of their conservation, though, they are considered near threatened. Because they have such a limited range, they are at risk of extinction if anything serious happened. The population estimated to be under 2,500 individuals, though it is believed to be stable. And the predicted effects of climate change could be something that could really affect the species, is the only really known threat. And the population on the Falklands is believed to be about 500 pairs, with 350 to 450 pairs on other South American islands. So that's another really cool little guy. Great Cakes mod, really did a wonderful job with this little Caracara. Really, really awesome. I love these striated Caracaras. Really awesome mods. I love that we're getting so many bird mods. I'm definitely a big fan. So, next up, we've got another Great Cakes mod coming up. We're heading over to Africa this time. We have got the Cape Vulture, which I'm really excited to get stuck into. So let's have a look at these guys. So the Cape Vulture. So these guys, also known as the Cape Griffin or the Kobe Vulture. These guys are an old world vulture that lives in southern Africa, mainly like South America, not South America, South Africa, Lesotho, Botswana, and Namibia, which is quite interesting. So these guys are quite a large vulture. You can see with like a creamy bluff color and contrasting dark flight and tail feathers, with adults being typically paler than juveniles, and their underwing coverts can be almost seen as like white at a distance. They have black bills and yellowish eyes, with juveniles, immature juveniles are typically a little bit darker. Is this a juvenile? I think this actually might be a juvenile. No, this is an adult. These are the juveniles here. Oh, no, wait, no. There's a juvenile. You can see typically darker. They can sometimes be quite bright. And they have naked necks, and they're closely related to the white-backed vulture, however are larger with the yellow and has yellow irises. So the average length of an adult vulture is about 96 to 115 centimeters, or about 38 to 45 inches, with a wingspan of 2.26 to 2.6 meters, or about 7.5 feet to 8.5 feet, pretty much, and a body weight of about 7 to 11 kilograms, or about 15 to 24 pounds. So there's two prominent bare skin patches at the base of the neck, which is also found in the white-backed vulture, and it's believed to actually help them like find thermals. So when they're flying, they can find thermals to ride on, so they can soar more efficiently, which is quite interesting. Is this one of the babies or an adult? Let's see. Yeah, this is a juvenile. I'll have a look at the adults. Look at this cool guy. Anyway, so with a mean body mass of about 8 to 9 to 9.2 kilograms, they're actually considered the largest raptors of Africa. And they're actually quite big. They're only rivaled by the great white pelican and the koi busted as the largest flying birds in Africa, so quite big. And after the Himalayan griffin vulture and the Cromerus vulture, these guys are the third largest old world vulture, which is quite interesting. So in terms of breeding and habitat, we'll talk about that. So the Cape vulture is resident and breeding in Botswana, Mozambique, Lesotho, and South Africa, but also can be found occasionally in the Congo and Zambia. But and other places they've been found in is Zimbabwe and things like that, but not a breeding there. In terms of their diet, like most vultures, they're scavengers, so they feed on carrion, eating soft tissue and organs and sometimes bone fragments. And they search for food typically in groups and can spot carcasses from a long distance because they've got good eyesight, and they're actually to locate carcasses much quicker than a lot of other ground-dwelling scavengers. So in terms of breeding, we'll have a look at the cute little babies while we talk about breeding. Oh, let me sneeze. Anyway, they usually breed and roost on cliffs or near mountains, and they've been recorded up to elevations of about 3,100 meters or 10,000 feet. And in South Africa's Eastern Cape, they've been known to use nest sites on ledges with smaller depths or high elevation, surrounded by other eagles. Tracked individuals actually have home ranges between 11,000 to 22,500 square kilometers, or 4,000 to 8,000 square miles or so. But they've also been known to roost on pylons and trees. Additionally, juveniles and adults prefer to roost on cliffs located closer to colonies, and it's believed that they tend to return to the same site every year for breeding, or area of birth to breeding. And typically, the fledglings have a mean post-fledgling dependency period of about 100 days, but they still rely on their parents, and the distance of the nest increases after this period, and then they gain independence. And though they continue to breed, some populations have been recorded in decline, and some have each been abandoned, which has led to that vulnerable status, as we'll get into. So in terms of the conservation status, they have considered to be declining steadily, which is a little bit of a sad thing going on. So since the 1980s, they were first classed as threatened, but now they're considered vulnerable. There's believed to be a 60 to 70% decline in South Africa alone, with the population estimated in 2021 being between 9,600 and 12,000 individuals. So they are considered to be impacted by a number of threats, by a lot of things that we do as well. So things such as nesting or targeted poisoning, loss of habitat, unsustainable harvesting for traditional uses being quite important as well, but also just like prosecution because, they're vultures, people don't like vultures, but actually very important for the ecosystem. And there's still a need to make farmers aware of them. They don't spread germs, they actually clean up a lot of old things on the ecosystem, dead bodies that could become like basically sewage or big like cesspits for disease. So these guys are really important in their ecosystems, and we need to protect them, especially in vultures where they are found, because they are very important to the ecosystem, and they deserve a bit of love. Even though they look a little bit weird with their bald heads and things like that, they definitely do deserve a bit of love, and very important for our ecosystems. So really, really cool. Let's have a look at the males. I think this is just like different variations, which is quite interesting. So we're going to move on and have a look at the next animal. Another great cakes mod. We have got Thorid's deer, or Thoroids den, or Cervus albisaurus. So this is a threatened deer that we'll get to talk about. So these guys are typically found in the grasslands, shrublands, or forests and the high altitude of the Tibetan Plateau. Another name for these guys, you probably know them as the white-lipped deer because of their white patches on their muzzle, which is quite interesting. So they actually fill a niche quite similar to the Tibetan red deer, which is a subspecies of the red deer, or species depending on who you ask, but they're sadly quite vulnerable. So as of early 2011, there was more than 100 kept in zoos, and the wild is estimated that about 7,000 remain in the wild. So there was first described as Thorid's deer because these specimens were actually procured by J.W. Thorid in 1892 and was called Cervus thoroidi. However, that former name, the species name, has been changed to make more Latin, and then their kind of name, the species name, species alborensis, comes from albus, was white rostrum in Latin, it refers to the right number. There's also a named Chinese word means balakulu, which means white-lipped, and it's part of the reason why it's also commonly known as the white-lipped deer. And they are a member of the genus Cervus, so they are related to, the other types of deer. That there have been some evidence suggests that it should be in its own, own genus, which is quite interesting. Presmorchium is the name of that genus. But other thing that makes these guys really notable, they're actually one of the largest of deer species. So they can typically get between 115 to 140 centimeters, or about 45 to 55 inches, with males typically, that's the shoulder height, males typically weigh between 180 to 230 kilograms and are significantly larger than females, with females getting between 90 to 160 kilograms, or about 200 to 350 pounds. You can see their colors are typically like a coarse grey-brown over most of their body, with yellow buff on their tail and a light underside, but also, those white lips where they get their name, white-lipped deer. But during the winter, their coat is paler and about twice as thick, even thicker than a moose, and then their typically head is darker than the rest of the body, which contrasts their bright lips. And typically adult, as you can see, they have antlers, so they measure about 110 centimeters in beam length and weigh up to 4 kilograms. And it compare much more flattened compared to waipardi and red deer, and they can actually have up to 7 tines, which is these little sticky out bits, and they actually shed them annually around March, and then they reach their full length again in the spring. And one interesting feature is that they have much longer ears than most other deer, lined with large metatarsal and preorbital glands. They also have quite broad hooves with large dew claws, which is really interesting. And this means they have a number of also habitat adaptations for high-altitude habitats. The short legs and broad hooves make them quite an agile climber, able to move across mountainous terrain to escape predators. They also have large nose cavities that allows them to kind of breathe in high altitude air a little bit better. The thick hair protects against cold. And actually, the red blood cells are actually smaller in average than other species of the same size, and are very numerous. That allows it to take in more limited oxygen that's in high altitudes. So we'll have a look at talk about the female while we're at it. So here's the female. It's not too different, just missing out the antlers and not quite as big. In terms of the habitat, they typically inhabit the Tibet, Sichuan, Huai, Jiangsu, and far northeastern Yunnan regions. Today they're only found in more scattered populations, although they're more numerous in those kind of areas. They typically prefer grassland or scrubland or forest, and they're often seen above the tree line between elevations of 3,500 to 5,000 100 meters, between 11,000 and 16,000 feet, higher than any other deer, along with the South American tauraco, which actually migrates a little bit, but still quite cool. In terms of their behavior, these guys are crepuscular, so typically come out at dawn and dusk, and normally live in herds of at least 10 animals. In the breeding season, males and females usually travel separately, but historically they're going to be in huge herds, reported of even 100 individuals. But like Waipati, they are typically grazers, but they feed on a wide range of plants, grasses and sedges, but they'll also feed occasionally on rhododendrons and willows. And they have few natural predators, but those predators do include wolves and snow leopards. They also have a range of vocalizations, including loud alarm calls, and very much like a reindeer, they can actually make loud snapping sounds with their carpal bones. And we don't know why, but that's still quite cool. So in terms of breeding, we'll have a look at the baby while we'll talk about breeding. So typically their rut is between September and November, where the herds will kind of containing both males and females become more common. And such herds consist of several males, each maintaining a small harem of females, and protects them from other males, and they use this by scent marking, wrestling, things like that. Typically, females will give birth to a single young after gestation period of about 220 to 250 days, typically early May, June. And shortly after that, the mother locates a secluded den, often with bushes and shrubbery, to cover them, and the calves are typically born, you can see, with white spots and are able to stand within 40 minutes of birth. Then initially the mother will protect them by moving them to different locations, only visiting them twice a day to allow them to suckle, but then after 2 weeks they are reunited with the herd. The calves' then spots will begin to fade at about 6 weeks, and they attain their full adult colour at the end of the first year of age. They typically become sexually mature at about 3 years of age, and then males will really successfully rut until about 5 years old. And they have been reported to live up to 21 years in captivity, but in the wild they probably don't live more than 12, because we know the wild is a pretty rough place for some animals, but still really, really cool. But in terms of their conservation, really, really sad story for these guys. Taurus deer are only found in scattered populations around their range, although the remoteness of their habitat has made them quite difficult to study. They are threatened by a lot of human factors, such as agriculture, competition with yaks and goats and sheep. Also, they are hunted for antlers and meat as well, and typically used for Chinese medicines. And they're considered vulnerable by the ICN. And they have been found and farmed for their antlers in China and New Zealand, and actually are found quite common in zoos worldwide. And it appears they are able to adapt to lower altitudes, typically with not much issues, so they don't have any issues with captivity, which is pretty good. We do like that. Very, very awesome. So yeah, we're going to keep carrying on. So let's have a look at the next animal. So another Great Cakes mod again. So Great Cakes mod is pretty much dominating this episode, but let's have a look at these little guys. So this is an extinct animal going back into prehistory. So this is Syndicaris. So these guys are a member of Artiodactyla, which is a family. They are related to like pronghorns, though a little bit more distantly. They are kind of their own group. They typically lived in central North America during the Miocene, so between 24 to 20 million years ago, living for about 4.2 million years. So these guys, as I mentioned, do live in America, so their scientific name is Cookie, or Cooki. So they were named by Barbour in 1905, with the type being Cooki, and they were reassigned to Proceratidae and then assigned to Cryptoceratini as their own group, which is quite interesting. So you can see their skull morphology is actually very interesting. It's not very like a deer at all, or like a very like they have these two pairs of horns. So they have like this one that kind of goes out on their mouth there, and then another that kind of loops in on their head, which is really interesting. The V-shaped one at the base, and then the second pair come between the eyes and curve inward, which is really interesting. And they're very, very similar to things like giraffe orthocones, or how you say that? Orthocones? I don't believe you ever said that. Ossicones. Yeah, ossicones. So these protrusions are covered in skin, and they would typically probably use them for fighting and things like that. And in addition to their horns, they actually, you can see as well, they've got these tusk-like canines, and they would have probably used them to root around in soil or look for food, very much like modern musk deer. And they also, the shape of their skull suggests that they had an inflated muzzle, very much like a saiga, which is quite cool as well. And they typically got to about 5'2" or about 1.6 meters long, and it would have looked very much like a deer, having two hooves, and would have weighed probably about 60 kilograms. Like early horses, these guys would have had two vestigial toes on each foot, but they did not touch the ground. But yeah, really, really cool. So let me figure out what they're related. So these guys are kind of a group of old, extinct American like ungulates. So they are, I believe, their closest relatives are Proceratidae. They're not too closely related to anything else. They're actually a little bit more probably closer to camels, but they're their own weird group that went extinct during the Pliocene. But look very much, kind of like Artiodactyls. They're Artiodactyls, a really interesting group. Very, very cool. Very superficially look like giraffes. Really, really awesome. But before we do that, we'll have a look at the little babies. Look at this little guy. A little bit of a... Look at this little guy. And that was the... I believe that was the male that we were looking at. Is that the male? No, it's a female. There's another female. Let's see if we can find the male. He must be over here. Yeah, he's not too different, I think. No, he's not too different. There probably is not much evidence for a lot of sexual dimorphism between these guys. Probably because we just don't have the specimens. But still, really, really cool. And what have you done? Anyway, we're going to move on now. So next up on last but certainly not least, we have got Dunkleosteus. So let's talk about Dunkleosteus. So let's have a look at you. So this is by Genora Pizza, ported and modified to be more accurate. So this is the JWE2 model, basically, and just modified to be a bit more scientifically accurate. So we're going to talk a little bit about Dunkleosteus. So Dunkleosteus was a large placoderm, which is a group of fish that were known for these kind of really hard heads. They lived around the late Devonian, so about 382 to 358 million years ago. And these were pelagic predators. There's been all sorts of different species described, about 10 different species. I'm not sure how they hold up, but very interesting animals anyway. So all sorts of different species have been described, and they are in their own group, Dunkleostidae. So at least 10 species, as I mentioned, have been described. The largest ones, there's been lots of debate about their anatomy. So some older estimates put them up to like 10 meters long and like up to 10 tons, 10 meters long. But most recent, there was actually a study just last year by Ilgerman that actually managed to calculate quite accurately the size of a lot of other fish, and then applied it to Dunkleosteus and made it to about, maybe the length of even 5 meters would be a huge one. The most recent kind of sizes puts it about, we'll go back, sizes between kind of 5 to 3 meters, 3 to 5 meters, which is still huge. It's like the size of a little bit smaller than a great white shark, but still a huge animal. So it really puts it into perspective. So yeah, really, really cool. So in terms of their diet, these guys obviously would have lived in a time with lots of other placoderms, lived with like another filter-feeding version called Titanoichthyes. So very well adapted for eating big animals, or hard-shelled animals. So they had a 4-bar linkage mechanism for their jaws that allowed them to pretty much close them and open them at high speeds. Also using suction feeding, or basically using the pressure of opening your mouth really quick to help grab prey. And they've estimated they have super high bite forces because of, what they were eating. So they were eating a lot of hard-shelled things. So it's estimated to be up to like 547 kilograms at the blade edge. Really huge bite force, which is considered the highest of any living or fossil fish, and among the highest animals. So they would have been well adapted for hunting animals like ammonites and placoderms and biting into them, which is quite interesting. And there's actually have been issues. A specimen of Dunkleosteus and Titanoichthys has been found with puncture damage, so they were likely hunting them. These guys would have been very big animals in the ecosystem. And the new research looking into them actually shows that they would have a much more of a turgiform, or very well adapted for eating, very adapted for swimming. They would have a very much of a body shape, more similar to things like tuna, which are very round and allow them to swim quite fast. So they could have been quite good fast predators. And not a big slow swimmer as we initially thought. These guys would have been fast pursuit predators as well, which is quite interesting. So yeah, they would have eaten, as I mentioned, eat a lot of placoderms, things like that. And obviously much smaller. The size, as I mentioned, now is estimated between like 3 meters, and more of the issue, more study sizes is like 950 to 1200 kilograms, so not too much over a ton. Even the largest ones are about 4.1 meters and just under 2 tons. So still huge animals. When they say they shrunk the dunk, they did shrink it, but it's still a huge animal, 2 tons. And honestly, it just means we just have a better idea of what Dunkleosteus actually looked like. And I think this new version actually fits its anatomy much better. And if you think about it as well, a lot of the placoderms they were living with were no more than a meter or two long. So it's weird having a big 10-meter long animal with all these smaller animals. So it kind of fits better in the ecosystem. But yeah, we do have some preserved fossils as well of the pectoral fin and things like that that actually show that we're very similar to sharks as well. High aspect ratio, and actually very much more adapted for swimming, very turgiform, so very much well adapted for swimming fast like tuna, rather than the big kind of long typical big long one with the high fin, or the high tail that a lot of older depictions are. It seems very much like built like a tuna from hell with big bone crushing jaws, which is really interesting. But yeah, in terms of reproduction as well, they actually were among the first vertebrates to have internal egg fertilization. So they probably did have claspers like the sharks do potentially. And some of the placoderms have actually been shown to have been viviparous, so give birth to live young. They have umbilical cords and everything. And in terms of their growth, we actually have some evidence of lower jaws of juvenile Dunkleosteus were proportionally as robust as the adults. So typically they stayed pretty much the same as babies, but just got bigger. Which is actually very weird because most animals are typically more gracile or more skinny and lanky as babies and then get bulky as they grow up. But baby dunks were pretty much the same as adult dunks and were able to eat pretty much the same version of their prey, just smaller, which is quite interesting. And yeah, really love this dunk. I really love talking about these guys. So as I mentioned, there's 10 different species, but I don't know how you could justify it. So the first ones were typically found, they were named by Jean Pierre Lemire to honor David Dunkel, who is the curator of the Cleveland Museum. So typically found around Ohio, and his other genus is named like Didactyls, things like that. That's when they were first found. Really cool. So they're typically found around Ohio. That's kind of what their state fossil, I believe, for Cleveland, I believe. And that's typically where they found them. So yeah, really cool. So I think Giorno Pizza did a really good job not only giving us one, updated it too, so we got an accurate dunk. I know Liv has done one for Jurassic World Evolution too, but she just updates her mods so much I can't keep up with them. So I'm going to wait until there's like a final version and then show off all her wonderful mods, because that'll be quite awesome. So yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. We've seen enough of Dunk. Ended with a really cool extinct animal. So yeah, thank you everyone for making these really wonderful mods. I think you all did a great job. So yeah, I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.